Hey everybody. So this is a just a general walkthrough of how to paint a rehearsal field effectively. I'm not going to go into hashes and ticks just yet. This is just putting the frame of your field out there so that it's not all crooked and wonky, because we all know if the field's crooked and wonky, then your drill's going to be crooked and wonky, and it's never going to be executed well. And we all also know that the first time you paint that field is the absolute most important. Don't go out there thinking you can eyeball it and screw it up, and then you've got to wait weeks on weeks before you can repaint. Otherwise, you're going to have double lines out there, and it's just going to be really hard for your kids to follow. So quick background on where I learned all of this stuff. I was fortunate enough to serve on the field painting team for Carolina Crown for a season, and then also just general experience working all my band camps. And I've looked at a couple of basic books and things to get some good knowledge on how to paint these fields effectively. Some of you might be fortunate enough to have maybe an athletic director that does it for you. And I just say be cautious of that. I've heard horror stories of them going out there and doing kind of a hack job, and then everything's wonky, and you kind of just have to deal with it for the season. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. So the first thing that you're going to need before you even get started, let me shrink my camera here, is the correct equipment and assistance. The equipment to get a field painted isn't that expensive. The initial investment of getting a field striper is probably the most expensive part, which I'll go through now. So the first thing you're going to want is the field striper. So field striper, you've probably seen. It's one of those bad boys. If you already have the correct equipment you need, you can skip through this part of the video. The second thing you're going to want, you need to make sure that you buy the correct paint. Striping paint. You need to make sure that you get striping paint, otherwise the paint might be very thin. And it's very important that when you begin painting, you look at the tip. You need to make sure that, because it's long, they basically, the long tip means that's the way it's going to spread out. So if you're going down the field this way, like this, it's going to give you a thin line. If you go down the field this way, it'll give you a thick line. So this is very important, the placement of this in your striper. You don't want to stripe an entire field the thin way, because then it's going to be hard for your kids to see. The next thing you need to invest in is not one, but two of these field markers, of these essentially very long measuring tapes. And the reason you need two is because we're going to be doing some general math using triangles and right angles. And if you don't have two of them, you're not really able to do it effectively. And the last thing that you need is twine. So basically the use of twine allows you to paint over the line directly instead of painting beside your measuring. Painting beside your measuring leads to just error, human error. It also leads to you painting on your measuring tape, which makes it very hard for you to read your measurements later on. So I really advise using twine next to your measurements, because they can just paint right over it, and it's super cheap. So once it gets all crusty from being painted on over and over again, you just buy a new ball of twine, and it's a heck of a lot cheaper than buying a new measuring thing. So, all right. And the last thing is a personal preference. This is what I use, and this is what I highly recommend. Some color of bright paint. I personally use this one. Basically, this is the kind of paint they use to, like, when they're doing construction where they mark like electrical lines or water lines and things like that. Um, I use this for basically like the tick marks that help you learn every four, on the 4-step intervals. So that way it's a different color than your yard lines. I've seen some people use blue. Personally, I think cool colors like blue and coarse green are harder to see on grass. That's why I go with bright orange. So now let's talk about the field setup. So you always start with the front sideline. Basically, you need to find the space that you're using, and you need to figure out how long do you want your field to be. You can figure this out basically by either telling me or your drill writer how much space you have to work with. If you can paint a full field, cool, but you might not need a full field. All right, you don't really need to expand the full field unless you are pushing more than 100 members. So if you're, a smaller band, you might only need to go to the 20s based on your preference. So how to get this straight as possible? Because this is just a straight line, you don't need to do any kind of measurements. Basically, measure out how long you want it to be, and then you use that twine and you pull it as tight as possible between those 2 points, and then you use what's called the pluck method. So the pluck method is basically you have your 2 points, and along the way there's going to be grass, maybe rocks, all sorts of little things, slight hills maybe, that are going to cause it to catch on things and be crooked. It's important, and also wind is also a factor. So pull it as tight as possible, and then you're going to need a third person. So you got 2 people on either end pulling it tight. You're going to need a third person in the middle to kind of just lift the twine up off the ground and release it, and that'll straighten it out. You might need to do it a couple of times before it looks really good, and I can't stress how important it is that you get that first initial sideline as straight as possible. Otherwise, the rest of it's going to look wonky. So really do your best to straighten that out. All right. Once you've done that, you're going to take your long measuring tape and you're going to start marking off every 5 yards or 15 feet. Wherever your center point is of the field, that's where you want to start. You want to make sure you got your center marked and work your way out. All right. Don't work your way in from the ends. Otherwise, your center is going to be probably shifted, not dead center of where you need it to be in that rehearsal field space. And the first line that you're going to do that's not the front sideline will be the 50-yard line. This is where some math is going to come into play. Don't think you can eyeball it. Please, just don't do it. That first line backwards is the second most important line. Once you get both of these straight, you're going to be in a really good place. So basically, you use some triangle theorems and you get that hypotenuse, and that's going to help you to make sure that these lines are straight. So you would use this hypotenuse to figure out the 50-yard line and then also your sidelines. And I'll show you essentially how that works. All right, so there's free websites online that will help you with this. So if you look over here on the right, you've got the A, which is your front to back, the B, which is your side to side, and your C, which will be the number that you need to make sure that this is straight. So if you're going to the back hash, that's 100 feet. If you're going to the back sideline, that's 150 feet. So your A, let's say we're going to go back to the back hash to mark our field because we're a smaller band. I would say I'm going to go 100 feet back from my rehearsal field. And to make sure that I get a good measurement, I'm going to make my sideline one at least 2 yard lines, so that way we get a solid measurement. It's going to be B. And our hypotenuse, which is basically the number that will make sure that our A, our front to back line, is straight, will pop up here. So you calculate it. You need to have 104 feet there. So basically, it does take some math, but they have these websites that can help you figure it out. And I'll show you essentially how I do it using two of those measuring tools. So let me hop back over here. So again, you'll need more than just you. I recommend having 3 people out there with you to help. Basically, you would stretch this out for the 30 feet in the front, and then where 30 foot is, you'd have someone put their finger right there on that 30-foot mark, and then it would be pulled back 100 feet. Okay? So now you have your 30 foot and your 100 feet. Then you use your second yard marker to make sure that you mark that 104 feet so that you, and then basically you don't shift the front sideline. Your angle A, or your front to back sideline, your 50 yard or your outside sidelines would shift to line up to that 104 foot to make sure it's a perfect line. Now you do this with the outside sidelines and the 50, and once you have that done, you know that those 3 lines are perfectly straight. Now, if your back line is the back hash or the front sideline, that's the next step. So if it's a back hash, you place a dot every 15 yards back there. Make sure that you're going across at the same distance behind your front sideline. So make sure you have that measured out and marked. If you're doing the back sideline, then of course it's a solid line back there, not a hashed out line. The back hash is 100 feet from the front sideline, and the back sideline is 150 feet from the front sideline. So the next step would be to add those yard lines. So if you marked every 15 feet for your back hash, you would go back hash to your front markings that you did on the front, or you would do your back sideline markings to your front sideline markings. And when you do this, you use the twine method from before. So you stretch it from that back mark to that front mark. You pluck your twine, make sure it's all straight and even, and then use your striper and go down and paint. Once you get the front sideline set, the 50 and the outside set, and then you get that back line straightened out, you're good to go. The rest of the lines just kind of fall right into place using your ticks that you put every 15 feet. And then you add in your front hash. This is what a hash looks like. Just make sure you just do a little simple mark across the line. The front hash is only 50 feet from the front sideline. All right, so that's a general rundown on how to effectively paint a field. Again, takes a little bit of math and a lot of patience, and hopefully some wind that's not super windy and will be in your favor. Heavy winds is a bad time to paint. Some other general tips: don't paint anytime. Don't paint in the morning because there'll be dew, and basically the paint's not going to stick as well. Don't paint right after a rainstorm. Don't paint if the grass is long, because then you're just wasting your time. Make sure your custodial staff or whoever goes out there and mows is mowing that field at least, 2 or 3 days before you get out there. You don't want it to be really long, otherwise they're going to go out there and chop it, and you've just completely wasted your time. All right, that's all I have. Good luck, and hopefully we can all march on some straight lines this season.